Why the name Calon?
The code name for the thing was Phono 2 because we had a Phono 1, so there's a Phono 2.
Yeah.
But I was looking for a name for it, and quite a few names came up. But for me, they were a little bit too long.
Yes.
And my colleague, Ash, he was coming up with some names and things. I said, no, Ash, that's just a little bit too long. And then he said, how about Calon?
Yeah.
I said, Calon, what? Is that with a K or a C? He said, no, it's with a C. Yeah. I said, okay, so what does it mean? And in Welsh, it means heart.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's actually a nice name because it is at the heart of your analog system. That's why we chose the name Calon.
Okay.
It's not too long to pronounce and not too difficult.
Yeah.
And it's got a nice meaning to it,
Yeah.
you know. It's got a related meaning to it.
What was your objective that you wanted to achieve?
Not the idea of the Photostage, but the idea of treating the signal prior to the RIAA equalization was always something that I had in mind. And it is not an easy thing to do.
Yes.
Because if you're using, for example, passive amplification, like using transformers and things, it's very difficult to get a very linear response from a transformer, especially if you're looking at, say, for example, up to like 50, 60K. It becomes quite difficult. And at the same time, a cartridge is almost like a microphone. So when you start amplifying that signal without the RIAA, you have to be absolutely sure you're not doing anything wrong or dramatically wrong.
Wrong means...
You know, the reason they called it the LP is long play. And long play was human nature. You have a good span of focusing for about 20-25 minutes. So if one side is 20 minutes, 25 minutes, then you have a break, you go turn it over, you play the other side. And if you're running at 33 RPM, if you cut full dynamic range, then don't forget by that time, high fidelity had already been established, which meant a certain amount of dynamic range, a certain amount of distortion, certain amount of intermodulation, noise, etc., etc. So if you're cutting linear a track, a 33 LP would be, I don't know, 5-7 minutes from beginning to end. So that wouldn't be long play. And also for high fidelity side, you will have a little bit too much high frequency noise, almost like the cassette or tape. They put a Dolby on there. You know. So the idea of linearization was that, okay, we reduce the low frequencies because they take too much real estate on the vinyl, and we increase the high frequencies. So from low frequency to middle, you got about 20 dB. From the middle to high frequency, you got another 20 dB. So this 40 dB of linearization, when you're playing it back, you just do the opposite. So you bring that 20 dB up to normal level, and you bring that 20 dB down. So you're effectively doing the opposite of the RIAA, which meant you achieved both objectives. Now, because the bass is at a much lower level, 20 dB down, 20, 10 dB down, you have the ability to have 20 minutes, 25 minutes on one side. And also because your high frequencies now, they get attenuated when they're being played, your noise level also gets attenuated by the same amount. So your high frequency noise is down. So you achieved both at the same time. Yes, you have, but you still have to play it back. And when you're playing back a record, your low frequency content, it is so low in level that by the time it goes through the filtering network of RIAA, it's damaged. Most of the time, if you look at a filter, electronic filter, is not like, for example, if for example I have a big piece of cake.
Yeah.
I say, okay, I want to take the top 20% off. I just cut it here, go like that, and it's done. My cutting of the top part of that cake has no impact on the rest of the cake.
Right.
But when a signal, you want to attenuate the top, the entire signal is going through that filter network. So that filter network affects the entire signal. It's not just that bit. It's not like a knife and throw away.
Right.
It's like being pushed through something that doesn't allow certain bits to go through. So everything gets pushed through that. So my thinking was on the Calon that if I can amplify that input signal, then put it through the filtering network, odds are at the other end I will get a healthier output. So that is why on the Calon, the main gain structure is actually on the input. Even when you're at default, you have 10 dB of amplification on the input signal. Then you add another 10, so it goes 20. Then you have another 10, it goes 30. Your RIAA has got approximately, I don't know, 35, 37 dB of gain anyway in it, that network. So with the 10 dB at the beginning for moving magnet, for example, you have your 40 odd dB of gain, quite loud actually for most moving magnets, so it's very healthy. It's not a problem at all. You have a fine adjustment on the gain on the output side, where you can go +2, +4, +6, +8, and that is okay if you really need it. If you don't need it, you don't actually activate it. You just activate the front. So you're if your system gain is very high, you're at default. So that's like 40 odd dB of gain. If you need a little bit more, you go +10, so that becomes 50 odd dB again, and then to roughly 6 dB again. So you've got that ability, but not post filtering, it's pre-filtering.
Pre-filtering.
And there were a couple of other things that I wanted to do with the Calon. And one of the things was to make sure I have a very good low frequency filter on there. It's not a low frequency filter that, you know, it cuts out your low audio frequency. Any suspension system, especially with a cartridge and a record, and it doesn't matter how flat is your record and how perfect is your tone arm, etc. You always have subsonic movement, which this subsonic movement will come into the amplifier. So amplifier will be wasting a huge amount of energy amplifying something that you don't want to hear. I mean, even if the loudspeaker is designed infinite baffle, so it's got a damping on the bass driver, the damping may stop the bass driver moving, but still moving. Maybe not the same amount as, for example, a transmission line or a ported loudspeaker or flat panel loudspeaker, for example. They would be modulating what you're hearing with that low subsonic frequency. And you can see whenever you hit the record, your bass driver is going like this. And that is not a good thing, both from a performance point of view, even at low level, but definitely when you want to listen loud, it just hits the ends. You just can't go loud. The driver starts distorting and going into its nonlinear range, you know. And just a waste of energy from the amplifier, for example. But obviously you don't want to do this filter in such a way that if you're listening to music and you put it on, it has an adverse effect. So effectively it continues from where our circuit comes, and it's almost flat to about 20 hertz and so on, even down to 17, where you've got most of your organ pipe music and so on and so forth. And then then it suddenly drops down. So by the time you get to 10 hertz, you're probably about nearly 35, 40 dB down. So you cut out all the rubbish that the amplifier and the loudspeaker are completely uninterested in. Now, if you can, at some point, address that on the turntable, it would be even better.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit difficult.
Okay.
That's very difficult to do because it's a very low frequency. High frequency, you can make damping very easily.
Right.
Without too much adverse effect.
Exactly.
But low frequency, you're talking below 6 hertz, 7 hertz, that kind of frequency.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that I wanted to put in. And I also put a proper phase reversal inverter.
Yeah.
So it's not actually changing your signal legs effectively.
Okay.
It's an inverted amplifier.
Oh.
Because sometimes, you may have an album that one track or 2 tracks on the album, you need to invert the phase. Not all of them.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens not because the engineers are doing something wrong.
Yeah.
It can happen very simply by, for example, having on one track having a particular equipment put in, whether it's in the mix or whether it's in the mastering or whatever it is. And say, for example, this electronic system is American standard.
Yeah.
Whereas the one before it is European standard, for example, and the XLRs are reverse phase.
Right.
So without knowing, you're actually inverting the phase of what goes into the lathe.
Yep.
For example, it can have many reasons for it,
Right.
but it has a huge impact when you're listening to the music,
Right.
especially on timing.
Right.
It's not so much that, it's out of phase. No, you wouldn't know. It's just that, for example, if you have a high frequency percussion, like a tambourine or a hi-hat or cymbals or something, if you don't have the phase correct, it sounds out of time. It's almost like I can't really follow that.
Right.
I rather it wasn't, and then you reverse the phase, suddenly everything locks together.
Yeah.
Hopefully when we are listening to something later, and I can show you that on Calon.
Okay.
And then when it comes to the structural part of it,
Yeah.
I learned from Phono 1, optimizing the left-right channel had a very, very positive impact on the overall performance.
Yes.
So on the Calon, I thought, I don't want to optimize them, I want them identical. So you go dual mono.
Yeah.
It can present an issue where, for example, a moving magnet cartridge that may have the shell grounded to the green pin of the cartridge and so on. But luckily, on the back of the Calon, the earth lift and so on, you have 2 switches.
Right.
So one is for one channel, one is for the other channel. So for example, if I'm playing an MG with a Sabre and I'm going into the Calon, one channel will be on position 3, the other channel will be lifted. And that way the ground is common between the two, but not as a loop, for example.
Okay.
So you have options there.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is that the only difference between the 2 channels in terms of their geometry is that probably the lower one has slightly more gravity attacking it. But, otherwise, they are absolutely identical.
Yeah.
And we have looked at we check. So every time one channel is made, is actually marked and serial number. This is left channel, this is the right channel. And if you look at, for example, the positives of the Calon, for example, at the reference levels, on 1K, for example, your second harmonic distortion is some 90 odd dB down.
Yeah.
Your third harmonic is 104 or 107 dB down. So it is not damaging your signal anywhere near as much. And because the signal that goes through the RIAA is already healthier, it is less affected by that circuit. So the end result, you have more dynamic range. It's almost like you put a dynamic range enhancer on the product. So yeah, it was an interesting exercise. And luckily it proved that the ideas behind it were correct. You know, the concept of doing it this way is correct. But as I said, it does have challenges on how you do the power supplying, how you do the grounding. For example, the audio boards, they are 4-layer PCBs, so they have the top layer with its own grounding and so on, the lower level with its own grounding. It's got a power plane that does the things and so on and so on. So it takes a little bit of working out. And also the power supply section, for example, we've got 2 different transformers. They're linked up obviously on the power supply board, but one deals specifically with its own regulated rails, with its own ground and everything, dealing with all the switching, LEDs, relays, all the switching FETs and so on is done separate to the other transformer where it's actually powering the audio boards.